Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Lindsey Byrd in Writing is Hard. This week's episode is all about how to design a graphic novel. How do you put the pages together? What things do you have to keep in mind? How to balance the story? And all of that and more is yet to come. I hope you enjoy. Today's author interview is with Angela Hsieh. Angela is a Taiwanese American illustrator and author whose life choices can mostly be explained by her love of goofy animals. Her life experiences include firemen carrying a sedated bear cub and catching a belligerent wallaby. Though she would like to include a disclaimer to that introduction by saying that all of this occurred while working in zoos and wildlife centers, and she doesn't encourage this kind of behavior in the wild. She's the illustrator of a critically acclaimed nonfiction middle grade science book, Antarctica, the Melting Continent. But her debut novel as both author and illustrator is entitled Lu and Ren's Guide to Geozoology, and it's out on the 27th of May, 2025. Its back of book blurb reads, Lu dreams of being a great adventurer, just like her ama, who is a world-renowned geozoologist. Amma has traveled far and wide, researching unique animals like dreamy cloud jellies, enormous sunfish, and playful moss goats. Though nothing Lu loves more than reading Emma's letters about her quests, even if she and her mom struggle to understand the Salian language Emma writes in. But when Emma's letters suddenly stop, Lu becomes worried. So when a nearby town needs a geozoologist, Lu decides to go on the journey to find Emma. She charts a course with the help of Ren, an old friend turned new travel buddy. As they follow in Emma's footsteps, Lu begins to discover the complex relationships between geofauna and between people. What stories has Emma never told her? And what's Ren hiding from her? So, just to get started today, what is it about this story that made you decide you wanted to be both writer and illustrator at the same time?
Uh, so a lot of it came down to the fact that I have spent many years working and studying to be an illustrator, and it was a matter of skill, really. So I went to art school for 4 years, and then after art school, I was an editorial illustrator for a few years after that before I got this book deal. And it really just feels like I've been, just flexing one arm and making one arm, the art arm, super beefy. And the other arm, I dabbled in writing and I still do it frequently as a hobby. And so it's like I have one really beefy arm and one noodle arm. And that's more or less the initial reason why I decided to make it a graphic novel and to both write and illustrate it. It's also a very personal sort of story, so I wanted to be the one to write it. And I also there are some things that I felt could be expressed better in illustration. One of the things that I really love about comics and graphic novels as a form is that you get to control the page turn. So there's a certain element of surprise that you can bring into the storytelling that isn't quite as easy to do when you're just writing prose because you generally not in control of that. So there are a few scenes, there are a few spreads where I wanted you to feel that sense of awe and wonder that Lou and Ren feel when they come across these geozoological features. So it's sort of like when you're on a hike and you're kind of sweaty and you're really tired and you're trying to get to the outlook and surrounded by trees, you can't really see much. But at some point, the ground evens out and you step out onto the lookout and you can suddenly see the whole valley underneath you. So that sort of feeling, I wanted to be able to bring that in, and the best way I could figure out how to do it was to do it through illustrations.
I have to admit, I was very grateful to receive an art copy of this book. I did read the whole thing and I absolutely loved it. And there were
Thank you.
definitely moments where I was turning the page and I saw everything and I was like, my eyes were going everywhere. Like, no offense to the story, but I was like, oh, look at the pretty this. Look at the pretty that. And then I got back to the story. But like for me, when I was reading it, I was just like, look at everything. And then I'd go back and read the dialogue boxes. But it really, the art was so beautiful. And I do think you controlled that page turn very well, where you'd be going through the story, and then you turn the page and you get to see the wonder and the surprise that was coming through. And it was fantastic.
Well, I'm really glad that came across.
It did for me. I can't speak for everybody. For me personally, I absolutely loved it. When you're designing a book, or a graphic novel specifically, I suppose, how do you know where to do those page turns, or where do you say, like, is there a pacing issue where you say, okay, it's been this amount of pages since I've completely wowed somebody with my magnificent, full page spread, or how do you balance, the smaller boxes versus the larger boxes over the whole of the story that's happening at the same time?
Ooh, that is something I could really go in depth with,
Please
but I
do.
think I think there are whole courses taught on this, so I'm not sure I can go that far, not without preparation at least. So,
On the fly. I'm just, dropping in, here's the master's level graphic novel course. I want it now.
oh gosh. So I lay out the entire book in thumbnails. It's 256 pages, and I draw these little, they're about 2 inches high. So these little boxes, and each of them represents a page. And I do all of those before I start making it look nice. So some thumbnails are just tiny, tiny drawings where I put the major elements in, and everything's a stick figure. And the whole point of that is to figure out the flow of the book. So that is the place where I start planning these spreads. To your point about not having too many of them at once, yes, that is something I have to pay attention to, but I didn't count out the pages. I generally kept maybe one per chapter, if, and some chapters don't have them, I think. Maybe there are splash pages, which is the one page, but spreads, I think, were more or less limited to one per chapter. And that thumbnail stage is where so much of the storytelling and the pacing happens. You get to get a bird's eye view of the entire book. And also, that is where you figure out where things drag or if you've gone over your page count. So, one of the things that was really interesting to try to figure out with this book was that when I initially thumbnailed, I overshot my page count. I had a very strict one of 256, like I mentioned earlier. And when I overshot it, I asked my editor if I could add more pages, and she was like, no, you got to figure out how to stuff this all into 256. So there was a lot of cutting, there was a lot of consolidating panels, making things more efficient. Um, but that is the basic overview of how I planned where these things went.
How do you know, like, you say you start with the thumbnails, but what about the dialogue? Because you're putting the story within all those thumbnails. How do you know in advance how many thumbnails you're going to need for all the dialogue and the actual progression of the story beyond the art itself?
So I sort of skipped ahead when I answered that question before. I do write the script first. I've been in this for so long that I forget that other people don't know what I know. So thank you for bringing me back.
I am a
Uh,
baby. I know nothing.
so I'm one of those people who has to write the script first. There are people who thumbnail first or thumbnail while they write, and I don't understand how their brains work. It's amazing, really. I don't think that way at all. I want to be very certain that my story beats are where I want them to be, at least in script form. They they get, expanded or contracted a bit while I'm working on the thumbnails, but the order of them is set by the time I get to the thumbnails. And the dialogue is more or less set. I did end up mostly cutting dialogue because at some point as I was laying everything out, I realized that my characters love to talk. And while that is part of their deal, they are very chatty. It doesn't always work in a comic format. You can get a page where it's all speech bubbles and you're like, wow, this is just too cluttered. I need to do something about this. So little bits and pieces got cut. Some extra dialogue that I wrote in that was just people reacting to things. I was like, no, that can be dealt with in an expression, or you can just assume that someone has reacted to this. But uh, the point is that I got the main part of it down, but there were definitely adjustments along the way.
So you said that your book was 256 pages. Who told you that it needed to be that length?
So the 256 pages was actually in my contract, and it's fairly standard for middle grade. Sometimes you can have a shorter book for younger middle grade, but it doesn't usually go over.
Okay, so you had your contract before you started writing the book.
Yes. So
Um, yeah,
graphic
how does
novel.
that work? Because I know that for when you're writing non-graphic novels, usually you write the book first before you get the contract. So how does it work to actually get the contract as a graphic novelist?
uh, like you said, it's a little different. Usually, when you write the proposal for the graphic novel, what you're submitting is a detailed synopsis, 10 to 15, although that can change, sample pages of finished art, and a cover letter, which explains who you are, why you're writing this story, and the work you've done in the past, that sort of thing. I think that should be familiar to prose novelists.
Yeah.
But because graphic novels, A, take so long to make, and are such big productions, I think they're just trying to catch you before you do all that work and then have to tell you that you have to change it. So that part of it is quite different the from doing a prose novel. I have found it very interesting to see my prose novel peers with these really short timelines and about how, oh, I haven't even been announced yet. And I was like, wow, I was announced in 2021. So it's quite different.
Yeah, I think it is quite different. Um, do you do any type of editorial changes or anything like that? Like for instance, you've got your synopsis, you've handed that in. Do you hand in the script first? What type of relationship or editing process do you have with the publishing house, or is it just like you spend 3 years making the book, hand it in, and that's that? Like, what does that editing process look like?
There's quite a bit of back and forth. So my synopsis even changed significantly from when I submitted it. My original synopsis was a little more, gosh, a little more artsy, let's say. It's very, wide sweeping vistas, very contemplative, not a lot of dialogue. And in fact, Ren didn't even exist in the original synopsis. And the feedback that I frequently got even from the agents and editors who decided they wouldn't acquire it was it's too quiet. You need a little more of a driving force, especially because I for the age range that I'm writing, it's just something that pushes it along a little quicker and isn't so slow. So I had to rewrite the synopsis first. And then once I did that, I moved into the script. And there were also significant edits on the script. So there was quite a lot of back and forth even before I put pencil to paper, as it were. And a lot of things got nailed down in the script phase before I moved on to the thumbnails.
Once you had like the approved script and you moved on to the thumbnails, were you giving pages in for them to look at and to say yes or no, or did you just give everything in all at once when it was completely finished?
So after thumbnails, there is a pencil stage. Then the pencil stage also underwent quite a few edits. So thumbnails are pretty much unreadable to everyone except for me. Like I said, they're little stick figures and little circles with tails coming out, and those are the speech bubbles. Uh, when when I moved to the pencils, things were at least a little more readable, even if they looked like silly string, and the text was laid out on the page. So that was the point where some of the visual edits happened. And after, I'll just take you through the rest of the process, which is after pencils is an inking stage. However, because I'm working in a lineless style, I didn't really have that stage. But most people who work with lines do. And that can also go through another round of edits. A lot of it has to do with consistency. They had someone check, do you have backpacks in all of these scenes? Did someone suddenly become left-handed when they were right-handed before? Or, you know, if this character was asymmetrical, did you put like this element on the other side? Things like that.
That's
And
really cool. So
this
it's
head
kind
has
of
six
like,
fingers.
yeah, it's kind of like doing line edits, but for art. Like that's the like we would like in our prose, we would have somebody going through and doing all of those types of checks as well, but like looking for that in the text, not the art because we don't have art. But it's basically the same thing, was just making sure the consistency is thorough all the way through.
Yeah, yeah, that is a good comparison. Yeah. After lines is colors, and there's fewer edits then. Unless something really stands out, like, oh, we missed this. You drew six fingers on this hand, and we didn't catch it before. So I skipped the inking stage. So I went straight from pencils to colors, and I handed things in batches. That helped set deadlines in between, and it also, if there was any final things that they needed to check, it was a good way to catch things as we were going.
What's your or did you have a unexpected experience at any point where like you thought you had everything nailed down and all of a sudden something happened, you're like, wow, I wasn't expecting that.
Uh, a few. So this is my first graphic novel, and there it was a very steep learning curve in a lot of ways. So there was one point where I realized that I was using the wrong page size. It was close enough that I didn't notice, but when it was handed to the designer, who, this is her job to catch these things, she was like, so you've been using the wrong page size this whole time. And like, you know, I went into a corner and screamed, and I came back and I fixed it. It was okay. It was fairly early on, and mostly it was filling out the corners because I think I had made it too small. It was okay. It was just annoying. There was a couple of other points where I thought I was done, and when I'm done with something, I really don't want to look at it again for a very long time. And they came back and said, "You forgot the backpack straps." It's just, so I had to go fix those. I just was very annoyed that I had to open the file again, especially when I had more pages to work on and I wanted to get to the next ones. So, you know, looking back on it, it didn't feel so bad, but at the time, I just got so angry. Not at anyone, just yelling to the void.
Sometimes the void needs to get yelled at.
Yeah, yeah, frequently, in fact.
One thing that I really loved about reading your book was that there was such a great atmosphere. Like as I'm reading it, I could really feel the setting, the place, the this. I felt like the characters were really connecting with their world, and it made sense for them to be in this world. As somebody who's coming from a prose background, all of that stuff is stuff that I would put into text, but obviously you were putting it into art. How do you make the decision of what you need to show as like visually? Because even in text, I don't describe every single house on the streets. I don't describe all of that stuff where you as a visual artist need to actually paint everything or make it all visual. So how do you decide what you need to put in so that it's enriching for the reader to experience, isn't too much, isn't too little? How do you make that decision? And then also, how do you make the decision of what type of story stuff can go into the dialogue versus being an artistic choice?
My general rule of thumb is put as much of it into the art as possible. I am making a graphic novel after all, so anything that can be put into the art and taken out of the dialogue, I do it. As far as how much detail to put into the art, how I generally approach it is the first few pages, the establishing shots, I think you could call them, are where I'm going to put the most effort. And those pages always take the longest and are very frustrating, actually, because I know as a reader, I know that I am not going to spend as much time on it as whoever spent drawing it, right? I know for sure that that's not going to happen. And yet, even if you don't, I think that when you get to this page, you will be absorbing some things about the setting that maybe you're not even entirely conscious of. And maybe you'll go back and take another look if something intrigues you in a later page. So, as much as I would like to spend a lot of time on every page trying to flesh out this world, I just don't have the time for that. It already takes so long to do these things. And you, the best I can do is highlight the most important parts and give you as much information as possible in the establishing shot.
How much time did it take you? You said that you started, I believe, in 2021, or was that when you just went to contract? Like, how much time from first idea to everything's going out to print was there?
So, the very first idea came in 2017. I didn't set out to write a book, but I drew an illustration for a friend that was a tiny figure climbing up the back of a giant guinea pig. And the reason I drew it is because my friend really loves guinea pigs. It really isn't, it wasn't too much deeper than that. But I drew this illustration. She loved it. I also included a little national parks postcard style description of it on the back. That was just like the Cabiolith Mountains are, a charming and often overlooked zoological phenomenon, and just a little information about how loud they weep and all of that. And that ended up turning into a series of other big animal mountains, which then ended up turning into geozoology, the book. I started actually writing it as a book perhaps in 2020. I went on submission and I had a fairly quick submission turnaround. So it I think it took 3 months for me. And I signed the contract in 2021, and it took me 3.5 years to finish it.
Would you say that's like a normal length of time for this type of book? Was it slow? Was it fast?
I think of myself as quite slow, but it also isn't unheard of at all. There are some people who are speed demons and they can finish a book in a year. I That is not typical in the least. And so I think I'm on the slower end, but there are also people who take even longer.
For your publisher, how did they work out deadlines with you? Were you upfront and said, I think I need this amount of time, or did they presuppose you're doing it by this date and this date?
We set a timeline and I blew those deadlines twice. I I'm really bad about estimating how long it take to do anything, and also I am not great at figuring in things like breaks and my inability to do anything when things get real bad in the world and in my life. I have this problem where I assume I can do anything. I shouldn't I shouldn't do that, but I do. And um, so the original publication date was supposed to be in 2023. And so I mentioned before that we divided things up in batches. So we divided things in a few ways. The script that came first, and revisions on the script, and then we'd move on to thumbnails, which had a deadline, pencils, which had a deadline, and color pages, which also had deadlines, and that was divided into batches. So we had to keep adjusting. I honestly should have been better about saying ahead of time when I just really could tell that I wasn't going to finish in time. I should have been better about approaching my editors and saying, hey, I need more time. But my editors were also really, really great at looking at the deadlines, looking at what I uploaded and going, hey, you need more time, don't you? At which point I'd just be like, yeah, yeah, I do. So it worked out, but there were definitely a lot of delays, and I'm very fortunate that my team just had an eye out on my progress. And I'll try to be better next time about being honest about that.
I think it's something that a lot of writers, and I'm sure graphic novelists struggle with is meeting those deadlines and how to communicate and how to manage it afterwards. It sounds like your editors were helping you and kind of on your back and saying, okay, or at your back rather than on your back, or they're supporting you with saying, all right, you need more time. And it didn't seem like it was catastrophic. Um, how would you go say that like I mean, you've already said that you could do better, but in general, that communication, how would you either give advice or how would you recommend someone dealing with those types of situations where they might need more time or they might need to adjust and even communicate with their editor in that way?
I think be honest, and be realistic. I This is one of those things where it's like do as I say, not as I do. Because like I had just said, I was not great about that. But hopefully, like I said, I can carry this advice for myself forward. There are resources out there to help you plan your graphic novel. There's a great one that's done by Carrie Peace. Uh, they made a spreadsheet that laid out your entire schedule for your graphic novels, including the pencils, the inks, etc. And I think it's just called the Graphic Novel Deadline Planner. It is available for everyone to use. That is a great starting point. I used it, but then I realized I was also very bad at estimating my per page rate. So, but you essentially what you did was you figured out how much time you spent on each page on each stage, and then the spreadsheet would calculate for you how much that ends up being for 200 pages, 300 pages, etc. So stuff like that is helpful. Also, don't be shy about asking for extensions, especially for things like graphic novels. The publishing team is used to it. As far as I can tell, they're like, we've done this before. But the earlier you let them know, the better.
Now, you had done the illustration for a nonfiction book prior. What would you say the difference between that experience and then just full on doing the full graphic novel experience was between the two?
Ooh, both of them were quite different. So I didn't write the nonfiction book. That was written by author Karen Romano Young, who is super cool, by the way. She's like a deep sea diver and also an, a writer. And so I had pretty much nothing to do with that side of it. For illustrating the pages, everything was laid out pretty clearly for me. I got pages with the text laid out and the spaces highlighted where illustrations were needed. And it generally was a pretty straightforward affair. It's just like draw a glacier here, draw some seals here. This is the page where we show all the animals. And there was a lot of just double checking to make sure things were accurate, since it is a nonfiction book after all. And the deadline was shorter, but I didn't really have a problem with that because each page had fewer drawings and it was a shorter book as well. So it wasn't a comic, therefore I didn't have to do essentially, six or more or however many illustrations per page. Um, there were a couple that I had to do more for, but um, in many ways it was easier, it was simpler, and I was told to draw specific things. So All that to say that the I really enjoyed doing the nonfiction stuff because there are ways in which it was less of a headache. And the pressure was sort of off in the sense that if someone didn't enjoy the story, as it were, it's a nonfiction book, so, different kind of story, but still there. Um, I didn't have to worry about that because that wasn't really my area. So, um, I'd be so down to doing another one.
And they say that you said that you were told draw a glacier, draw seals, draw this. Did you have any reference of like what type of glacier, what type of animals, like in the format? Like, were there pictures that you were given? How did you like know what to draw?
They were very specific about it. I had a few photo references for things such as ships. So ships are such a pain to draw. They are, oh, I never want to draw a ship again, especially research vessels. They've got so many bells and whistles and bits and bobs, but I had to be accurate to those. So, especially specific vessels. If this vessel had a name and people knew it, then I had to get it right, or at least close enough. For the other things like seals and glaciers and whales, you could easily find those online. So I wasn't given specific reference, but I was double checked on my work.
Was there a lot of like tension of like making sure that you had everything perfect?
There was some. I tend to be detail oriented in that way anyway, so it wasn't the worst. um, but I wasn't terribly worried about it, to be honest. I trusted them to catch me if I got it wrong, and I trusted myself to get close enough.
That's always helpful, making sure that you were comfortable, you had the team, and you're like, all right, great, let's move on.
Yeah.
One of the things that interests me about your book is that you use the word geozoologist. What would you say the difference between geozoologist and zoologist is?
The geozoologist is a mashup of geology and zoology. And so essentially, rock animals and the study of them. Uh,
Well, I don't know if it's spoilers, so I don't want to like get too into it, but there's definitely like an importance with rocks and animals at a certain point in the book, where
yeah,
it's very
not really a
evident where that
spoiler.
particular moment shows up.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like, I mean, I didn't, maybe I wasn't understanding, but it wasn't like every animal was a rock. Like there were other animals that were doing other things. So
Yeah.
why use the word geo for all of it?
So there are other animals, like you said, with like Lou has a dog, and that's just a dog. Piran is a
I don't know.
big
He
old
lived a
dog.
long time. It was a very good dog.
Hey, it's a fantasy. I can make the dogs live as long as I want.
Dog doesn't die. We can put
Yeah,
that on the
exactly.
website. He does not
Exactly.
die.
Um, so geozoology specifically refers to the big mountain animals and also the smaller rock animals. I just figured that if there are big ones, there are little ones as well, but there are also the not rock animals, and you just gotta learn to live with all of them.
A lot of them were very familiar, where they look like animals that we have in our world, but much bigger and have much more impact. When you were designing this world, why did you choose the animals that you chose, and why in the place that you chose to put them in?
Frankly, it was very self-indulgent. I like these animals. I want them to be big.
I'm
Um,
getting that from your t-shirt. I was looking at it. I was like, I wonder if she likes those animals.
I don't know. It's all over my cover too. So but with that premise, right? Like as a fantasy writer, you take this premise and you're like, oh, but this will affect so many things in this world, and now I have to figure out how that works. And so, all right, I want big guinea pigs. What does that mean for this place? Well, it means everyone has to live with these big guinea pigs. It means that they can cause problems if you're in their way, and they'll affect the environment in a certain way. And if that happens, there will be people who study them. So that's a lot of things built from that particular premise. Um, I sort of lost the thread of what you were trying to ask in this moment.
Well, I was going to ask, you chose these animals who live in this specific world and they're interacting with it in a very specific way. And I think you did answer that where you're saying, like, basically, you introduce animals that are quite large in an ecosystem, they have an effect. The environment will change, the way people live and interact with that ecosystem will change as a result. Um, I guess what I would follow up to ask is one of the things that I got out of while I was reading the book was there's a lot of education almost on actions have consequences. And this is for a middle grade audience. Um, when you're writing a story that has that kind of enmeshed into it, um, is that something that you think of from the get-go? It's like, I'm writing for this age group and this is an important moral lesson, or I'm, going to impart this and this is a way to do it. How do you convey either the moral lesson or um, the intentionality behind the story while also using all these beautiful, amazing animals and fun ecosystems and fun things at the same time?
So I didn't actually set out to teach a lesson. You know, I worry that if I did, it would come off as preachy. And I think that lesson sort of just arose from what I was trying to do with the world, what I was what I was pulling from in terms of real life examples, and just generally my love and my interest for the natural world. So there's there's a part of the book where Lou finds out that her grandmother sort of messed up in a way that is not really easily fixable. And she tries to fix it. You can guess how that goes. And that whole sequence came about in a couple of ways. So first, I did know that when I was setting out to write this journey of Lou trying to find her grandmother, she was going to learn things about her grandma that she didn't like. I think that was an important part of it. You obviously there are people in your life you love a lot, and part of growing up is being like, "Oh, they didn't do good things all the time," even if you really admire them. And so that was one of the things that I had to that I wanted to work into the story. And because her grandma is a geozoologist and I am very interested in the way that things interact in the natural world, it was almost an obvious conclusion that that would be a part of it as well. So there's a lot of cases in real life about introducing species to places where they don't belong and the consequences thereof. And I think when I hit upon that idea, I was like, oh, obvious. Of course it was going to always be this way. But I didn't want to, approach it with the whole, this is bad, you shouldn't do this. I think it was a result of the characters and who they were and of the world and how that works.
Well, I think that makes sense. Now, did you know from the start that you were going to make it for a middle grade audience?
Yes. I think just the whole concept was so very middle grade friendly with the big animals and um, adventure, and having it be in full color was also one of the things that I really wanted to do, even if I griped about it a lot. while I was making it. I was like, wow, why did I do this to myself? But I went into it knowing that this is what I would have to do if I wanted to make the vision that I had set out to make.
What would you say a difference would be between writing a graphic novel for a middle grade audience versus writing it for a young adult audience and then eventually an adult audience?
I don't think I can answer that because I've only done one of those things. I do intend to branch out, but I'll get back to you when I do.
Because it's just something that I'm curious about. Like I feel like in prose, we're told, well, first off, the length of the book is very different, but also the wording that you're using, the type of phrasing that you're using, the message that you're using, stuff like that is always very different. With middle grade books, you're not using the five syllable words because they might not be able to pronounce those or understand what you're saying. You can up the complexity a little bit more in the young adult books. So I'm curious if there's like a style change or if it's just you can have the animal stories, but maybe something is a little bit more, I don't know, ruthless, intentional. Like I'm not sure what is the age. I don't know. I'm curious too.
To be fair, geozoology is 6 syllables, and I did get away with that.
You know what's funny? My 2-year-old nephew can pronounce dinosaur names like nobody's business. He can just whip them out. And like he was like, this is a diplodocus. And I was like, I have no idea what that is. And
Good
he's just
job, kid.
he's so good at it. He's like, and he'll point to like Triceratops, Tyrannosaurus. And it's like, you know what? You're a badass 2-year-old. So I don't know if it's necessarily a complexity thing, because yeah, geozoology is not a complex word. I do wonder if like adults put complexity into things sometimes where they think, oh, that's too complex for a child. But maybe it's the difference between a noun word versus an adjective word, which is a little bit more ephemeral. So maybe that's a little different. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we definitely had discussions about that. I did when I was on submission for this, I actually got that critique quite a lot, where they're like, "Yeah, this is a little too complicated. Maybe not." But I didn't really, I didn't really change that much in terms of complex words because where I'm coming from is if I, as a, ooh, how old was I? Somewhere in the range of 8 to 10, could memorize all the Pokemon. And not just me, everyone else in my grade knew all of the Pokemon. They can handle this.
That is a good point.
Yeah.
That is a good point. It's definitely a bit of talking down to a child and their intelligence when you say you can't handle something.
Yeah, I try not to do that. And there were definitely points where um, I was told to back off a little bit, and it made sense. I think I slipped in a big vocab word at some point, and they're like, maybe you should find a different one. I'm like, oh, that's all right. As long as it wasn't changing the world. So
Uh,
I think I'll have more to say on this when I do write for other audiences, but that's what I got for now,
I'll see you at your next book.
which is also going to
We'll
be
come
middle
back to
grade. So
this. Now you said earlier that Ren was not originally part of the book. When you did decide to include her, she does have a pretty significant story through the book now. What made you decide that that was the story you wanted to go with and approach, and why did you incorporate it in the way that you did?
so like I said, mentioned earlier, the original draft of this was really artsy. And it became pretty clear pretty fast based on all of the feedback I was getting that I couldn't keep doing that. So when I was redoing the synopsis, I brought another character in to not have Lou be alone the whole time and have someone to bounce off of and someone to talk to. And she came into this story much later at first. But as I was going through the drafts, I realized that it would be a stronger story if she came in earlier. And I say I realized that, but it was also a lot of the editor being like, hey, have you considered? What do you think of? So I, credit to my editor, Karen. Um, and as I brought her into the story more and more, I realized that she had to have a story of her own, right? It would seem very flat to have her just be there to support Lou's journey. Like she has to have her own motivations and her own way of thinking. And as with any friendship, you're not going to agree on everything, especially in a high stress situation like traveling. And so as I worked on it, found I looked for ways where they could be a foil to each other, even if they do spend most of the book more or less getting along and sort of going towards the same goal and having a good time. They needed to have tension between them. And being able to have this tension would help me explore the themes of the book even further. Because one of the things that I thought was really important when I set out to make this book was so Lu and Ren are both Asian American, or the fantasy version of Asian American, and our stories are very, very different. There's a very wide range of backgrounds that we come from, and within this one book, I wanted to at least touch on some of them. Of course, I couldn't do everything. There's only so much in it in 250 pages, but I wanted to be able to show that although these people might come from similar-ish backgrounds, there's a world of difference between them, but also a lot of similarities, and they find their way through life together in their own way.
I really liked the exploration you had not only of family dynamics and how those family dynamics change depending on who's interacting with who, and even within the same family, different people in the same family and have a different relationship with each other from other members of the family, which is very realistic. Um, but then also the exploration of language and how translating and mistranslating and struggling to connect with that language. Like, I feel like that really became so evident on the page. And also the society dealing with, well, this is a language that we might have known at one point, but we don't know any longer. And you're going to have to go and talk to, the scholars about that. And it really was very just very touching, like when you're reading it and seeing like this is a heritage that is being lost, a heritage that's trying to be reclaimed. For me, it was very poignant.
You. Yeah, this is something that a lot of diaspora kids experience, I think, especially when you're coming from when your family comes from a place where they speak a different language. And I speak from a US centric perspective, of course, because that's where I grew up. But you're in the US, you talk to your friends and everything in English. And you may you speak your mother tongue at home, but there's going to be at some point, your English is just going to far outpace your mother tongue. And a very interesting thing with Chinese is that even though you can speak it, you can very easily be illiterate in it. They're two separate things. So if you spoke an alphabetical language, I think you could piece it out, right? If you know how to pronounce something, you look at it on a page, you can sort of figure it out if you know the alphabet. But with Chinese, it's a character-based language, so you can easily just have no idea what's happening on the page, but be able to converse with your family. And we're lucky to live in an era where phone calls and video calls are very accessible to a lot of us. And so I can still speak to my grandparents that way. But in this fantasy world where phone calls aren't a thing, I imagine that must be really, really difficult. And if the only way that you can communicate is through letters, then, well, good luck, I think. And one of the things that I love about fantasy is that you are able to take a problem and make it bigger, right? And that helps push the metaphor along. And so this language barrier, I was like, oh, you know, I would love to explore this. This is just something that's been on my mind for a very long time. And not only is there a language barrier in terms of not being able to read the letters, if you put these two people very far away from each other, which often happens in diaspora families, then you really can't communicate at all except for this letter, which is a poor substitute. So that was definitely one of those things that I found very important to touch on in this book.
I definitely think that it came across very well. There were a few moments where it was just I could feel the emotion behind it, and I was just like, oh, this is a moment. And so I think you did such a great job with it. I'm just gonna continue to heap praise on this book. It was
Thank
so
you,
well
thank you.
done. Before I let you go, because we are running a little low on time, I did want to ask you, is there anything we haven't had a chance to talk about yet that you would like to talk about?
I did want to say for people who are making a graphic novel or even a prose novel, whatever your form of art is, make sure you take care of yourself. It's very easy to overwork yourself. And one of the things that I will always shout from the mountaintops is you need to take breaks. You cannot draw more graphic novels if you ruin your wrist drawing the first one. Also, sleep. Please do that.
Yes. As a prose person who is not a graphic novelist, I will say I have given myself carpal tunnel in both hands before.
No.
And then I just could not write for months
Ugh.
because I spent, a good 2 weeks writing 10,000 words a day. And then my hands went, that repetitive stress injury is not going to happen. And that was it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So it applies
Gretchen,
across the board.
do you have any preferred stretches that you do as a graphic novelist?
Um, yeah, so stretches are good. Nothing replaces breaks. However, there's I guess I'll just show them. Do this on both wrists.
So basically, what she's doing for the audio people is flexing your fingers backwards and forwards on your wrist.
Yes. I forgot there was an audio component to this.
No,
Um,
it's okay. Just I want to make sure people who can't visually access just know that you take your fingers and you push them. Suplex and I don't remember the
it's more about the
actual.
wrist than the fingers, but yes.
Yep.
Yeah. But also, if you just Google stretches for illustrators, they will come up.
Yes.
Uh, but again, they're there. The best thing to do is take a break and not grip your pencil too hard.
Yes. Very important information.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. This has been so insightful.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this week's episode of Lindsey Byrd in Writing is Hard. You can find more information about Angela Hsieh and her book, Lewin Run's Guide to Geozoology, in the description. I've also included some additional references for those that are interested in continuing their graphic novel journey. If you enjoyed this content, please do like, share, and subscribe so we can continue to bring you more. Bye for now.